If that ferry appears to be moving at warp speed in the foreground, it is. All of the Cross Hudson River ferries are packing as many people as they can and traversing the river as quickly as they can. There is the street scene outside the familiar Today Show studios on the plaza in New York. A word here about the scope of what we are covering tonight. This is a blackout of massive and historic terms. From Ottawa, Canada, far to the north, west to Detroit, where the Detroit Metro Airport shut down early on in this, while other airports were still open at pilot's discretion. Then came word that we had lost power in Cleveland, Ohio. A lot of the state of New Jersey is completely down, as is the state of Connecticut. New York's capital of Albany went out early as well with the failure of the major system. And of course, the entire island of Manhattan, all the outlying boroughs, that is, a lot of the streets and highways in New York have become de facto pedestrian malls. This will get very dicey when night falls in this city with no street lights or traffic lights. A lot of people, especially unfamiliar with New York. This is the height of the summer tourist season, and quite a welcome they're receiving from the city of New York. To repeat, that is the Weehawken Ferry across the Hudson to New Jersey. 20,000 people left for that ferry on foot and arrived there to learn that they were all going to divide up among two boats running today. One major ferry line is not using the Hudson River. To our Washington bureau we go, and NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, early on, you were among the first to reassure us what you were hearing from federal officials, that this is what folks in the power business call natural causes and not what everyone was concerned about early.
Exactly right, and the Department of Homeland Security was literally checking in the dark to see if that was the case, but they say again tonight there is no indication that terrorism was in any way involved in this massive blackout, and that's the consensus, too, of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies.
The Federal Aviation Administration grounded all planes waiting for takeoff at the three main New York area airports, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. Airports in Cleveland and in Canada at Ottawa and Toronto were also added to that list. Planes in the air had the option of landing at those airports, but planes on the ground at other airports scheduled to go to those cities could not take off. Homeland Security officials say they have no idea when they'll know the exact cause of the power blackout. Tracing the point of failure involves sending signals over power lines bit by bit and then dispatching crews to check for problems.
While officials are relieved that there is no indication of terrorism, they are concerned at how widespread this failure went and how quickly it spread, despite systems that were intended to prevent such a cascading outage. One official says tonight this does expose a potential vulnerability, Brian.
And Pete, there are tapes of 1965, that fateful night in the city of New York. Then President Lyndon Johnson calling his aide at the White House saying, "Don't tell me that this all went out without some sort of sabotage." He didn't believe it. Here we are looking at the same system failing and then some, with all the advances society has made in intervening years. Think of how much of our lives run off electricity. Does this say anything about what's supposed to be the fail-safes along the line?
Yes, it says that as these systems get more complex, they also develop more vulnerabilities. One of them is to the extent that power companies depend on the internet. That's a concern. There have been at least 2 committees appointed by the federal government to look at what is dryly called the nation's infrastructure. And this is something they come back to over and over and over again, at how a relatively simple event can quickly spread and affect so many people. And it's another reminder, they're saying.
Pete, as people were scurrying through lobbies and streets here in New York today, there was a period of several minutes when what we did not know far outweighed what we did. How does the federal government and its vast and many tentacles reach out to find out where the problem is, how far it extends, and who knows what?
Well, first of all, we have a Department of Homeland Security now that we didn't the last time it happened, and they've been in touch with all the city mayors and governors affected, asking if they want any help, and we're told tonight there haven't been any requests. No one's asked for the National Guard or anything like that. One question is, how do they screen airplanes for now? Do they let people go into the secure areas if they can hand wand them, or do they hold everybody back because they can't x-ray bags? That's something Homeland has to decide. The Ambassador Bridge that goes from Detroit into Canada is open, we're told, with backup power. So it's been largely a matter of working the telephones to find out what cities want, what they need, and right now they're saying to the federal government, hang tight, we really don't need anything right now.
Pete Williams in our Washington Bureau will be coming back to you, I'm sure, throughout the evening as we have all afternoon long. Pete, for now, thanks. Rahema Ellis is not far from the 59th Street Bridge in Manhattan, I am told, and she can give us some perspective of life on the streets of New York this hot summer evening with no power. Rahema, good evening to you.
Good evening, Brian. Rush hour in New York is famous for gridlock, but tonight it has a virtual standstill. I want to pan the camera over a little bit so you can see what's happening in the street. If you would move over just a little bit, folks, people are literally walking out of the city of New York today if they can. They are not just on the sidewalks, but in the middle of the street. It is locking up the traffic unbelievably. The cars are everywhere. All is choked down in this city. It's been an incredible experience here from when the lights went out early on. That meant the traffic lights went out. Early on, when I walked about 3/4 of a mile away from Rockefeller Center, what I saw was people being incredibly courteous to one another. About 10 or 12 cars would pass down the street and they would stop and then allow the cars to pass in the opposite direction. People could hardly believe what was happening, but one thing that happened was there was no panic in the street. One of the reasons I believed is because many people were able to tune into radios, transistor radios, or to car radios, and they heard that what was happening here was a power outage. That relieved them tremendously from any sort of fear that there might be some sort of a terrorist threat. Not that, but a power outage. So they were extremely courteous. People were also prepared. One woman I talked to, I asked how did she get out of one of the high-rise buildings. She said she had a flashlight. It's part of her emergency kit that she carries to work with her and everywhere she goes in New York City, because she was here on September 11th and she is never without it. Other people trying to get home. I saw a man, he had written a sign of Westchester, trying to get someone on the street just to pick him up and take him to the county north of New York City. I think he might have gotten a ride because people were being incredibly courteous. The police tell me at Precinct House 17, a detective told me that when the lights went out, they got flooded with phone calls. Primarily people saying that they were stuck in elevators. So what they did was they immediately mobilized people and the fire departments to those various high-rise buildings. And they mobilized their officers to some key intersections to try and control the traffic. In addition, they said they sent officers to vulnerable spots, to the United Nations, to Wall Street, to the Empire State Building, to bridges. Because at first, they didn't know exactly what was going on, and they wanted to try and make certain they were at the key vulnerable spots in the city. But once again, Brian, there are hundreds of thousands of people making a mass exodus out of this city tonight. Many of them are on foot. It is all happening in as orderly a way as it can when you have traffic that is clogged like it is here today. A lot of it is at a standstill, but there is not the panic. And people are being, I think, as courteous as they can be, considering what the circumstances are. Brian?
NBC's Rahema Ellis at the foot of the 59th Street Bridge on the east side of Manhattan tonight. Will be coming back to you. And such an important point that the emergency kits that were urged on all Americans by the Department of Homeland Security that came out of the tragedy of 9/11 proving tonight to come in handy as we cover this colossal power outage that stretches from the furthest reaches of the East Coast all the way west to Cleveland, Ohio, and all the way north to Ottawa, Canada, and beyond. You'll notice Hartford, Connecticut, much of the state of Connecticut, totally in the dark, at least the interior spaces. That would include Union Station in New Haven. That is where Annie Rourke is from our NBC station WVIT there. Annie, what's the situation in New Haven at this hour?
Well, Brian, is much the same story here in Connecticut as you see in other areas. 182,000 people are without power right now. For the most part, those are people that are closer to New York in Fairfield County in the southwest section of Connecticut. But we have had reports of people having problems all the way up into Hartford. People along the shoreline took a very big power hit. The power went down, then came back up again, went down again, and then came back up. And for the most part, at this point, it is staying steady right there. Now, here at Union Union Station, the trains are not moving at all. It is at a complete standstill, and that is a real problem for Connecticut because hundreds of thousands of commuters go in and out of New York every day, and we're told there are thousands of people that are stranded in trains on the tracks right now. Now, what they are doing is actually taking diesel train equipment from another rail line, Shoreline East, and shipping that down closer to Metro North, closer to New York, to try and fix those trains, get those people off the trains, get them to a station where they can get some help. Now, a lot of people are stranded here at Union Station. We've seen people with their luggage just dragging their luggage along the streets looking for hotels. Obviously, the taxis are doing a great service and the buses are just packed, but unfortunately, they are not going down into New York at all.